to The Book of Life, a show about Jewish books, music, film, and web. I'm Heidi Estrin. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida. Additional support comes from the Association of Jewish Libraries. The Book of Life's Canadian correspondent, Anne Dublin, introduces us to Montreal musician Orit Shimoni, leader of the band Little Birdie. Orit gives us secular and Jewish-themed songs with a folky, country, alternative flavor. You can check out her music at sonicbids.com/littlebirdie or look for her album Cinematic Way on CD Baby.
Last November, I listened to a group called Little Birdie at a jazz club in Toronto. One reviewer said this group is rooted in folk, shaped by country and bluegrass, and moved by rock and blues. That's an eclectic mixture of music, if I ever heard one. Orit Shimoni has been performing her own material since she was 16. She has lived in Calgary and Jerusalem and is now in Montreal. She met musician Andrei Kirchhoff and formed her group Little Birdie. I caught up with Orit in Montreal.
Hi, Orit. Well, I have some questions for you, and my first one is about your band. And why did you call your band Little Birdie?
It's been asked before. It wasn't actually me who named the band. I think that I was pretty reluctant to use my own name, mostly because it's so Israeli specific that I didn't want people to come into listening to it with a bunch of presumptions. And I also wanted it to feel more neutral and that every band member was part of the band, even though they were my songs. I kind of wanted it to feel more like a collective for everyone else that was involved. However, I was completely uncomfortable with the idea of naming it myself, so I put it out there to a bunch of different people, a bit of a challenge to name the band, and we were sitting somewhere and listening to another band play, and they were playing a song, really pretty song by a group called the Red Stick Ramblers, and the first line of the song is, "Won't you rattle my cage, little birdie?"
Uh-huh.
And one of the people sitting there went, "That's it, it's Little Birdie." And I thought, okay, sort of let it think for a while, and it's good because it has lots of different meanings. It's a very metaphorical concept, and it sort of suited the sound at the time, and it stuck. And it has its drawbacks as well because it's not very specific. It doesn't tell you much about the music just by the name. And there's a band in Australia called Little Birdie, so we get a lot of strange MySpace messages that are misdirected. But yeah, the name's kind of stuck, and we've kept it.
I'm wondering if you're the little birdie. Is that one of the meanings?
It has, for sure. The songbird is definitely one of them, and just the idea of like a spiritual entity of, like the winged thing, or the songs are the little birdies. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely people who see me and go, "Hey, little birdie." so it's sort of become me.
Yeah, it's great to have titles or names that have multiple meanings. I think that adds depth to your content or your message.
Absolutely.
So that brings me to a question that I had. I mean, in the introduction, I was talking about, some reviewers said about how your music is an eclectic mixture of many different styles. Is that how you would describe your music, or is there a better way?
I find it really difficult to just say one genre, and people ask, "What kind of music do you play?" And I just feel like it's a trick question, because if I say folk, then they'll get the wrong impression, and if I say country, they'll get the wrong impression, and rock. And the other thing is that we've played in so many different formations that sometimes just me and Andre, and it's quite folky, and it depends the venue we're playing as well. And other times we've played with a 6-piece band with drums and electric guitars and bass. It's seen a lot of different forms. So for me, that's really nice because here I am sitting and writing songs, and then I get to hear them in different ways. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I find it really hard to say what kind of music it is. I would rather people just listen to it and say for themselves. It's been compared to such outlandish things as far as I'm concerned that I never would have thought of.
Yeah, so I guess it's liberating not to be put in a box, isn't it? To be that open.
Yeah, I'm not big on the categorizations. I find them really limiting.
Let's talk about geography. I understand you've lived in Jerusalem and in Calgary, and now you're settled in Montreal. How has living in these different places affected your music, if it has?
It definitely has. Calgary, I would say, was influential. First of all, I went to a public high school that had a really good fine arts program, and so it was really easy to get into music. I, formed my first little band then. I don't even know if I have recordings from that era, but was getting up there and doing little coffee shop gigs and that. So that's when I started. I was, I guess, just old enough to, instead of singing in front of the mirror, actually getting out and doing it with other people. So I think the kind of fantasy of being a musician started in Calgary. And then I moved to Jerusalem, and I played there. I had weekly, coffee shop or bar gigs there. But there I found it, I don't know if it was the place or me at the time, but I found it very difficult to meet other musicians. So it was, I wrote a lot and I performed a lot, but it wasn't a musical career awakening because it was very limited in who I interacted with. So it didn't, having the people to work with that I've had in Montreal has definitely lifted everything to a whole other level. So. But Jerusalem affected my writing a lot. I think this affected me very much to be there. And I got there in 96, which was a really optimistic era. And I left in 2002, which was quite a devastating era. So it affected me quite deeply, I would say.
Were there problems in language that affected your writing, or did you continue to write in English, or did you start writing in Hebrew at all?
I definitely wrote exclusively in English. I spoke Hebrew as a child, but I never thought I would write songs in Hebrew. And only after moving to Montreal, after a couple of years, did I actually start writing in Hebrew as well. Stylistically, it was almost like biblical sounding Hebrew, but with very modern sentiment. So there was more, you could play with it more. Hebrew's really unique that way because it's metaphoric just by being in Hebrew. It's already elusive, so it's different than English. It's charged more specifically than English is to me. When I write in Hebrew, it's often kind of an out-of-body experience, and it comes out in sounds. And only when it's written, I look at the page and realize the content of what I've just written.
I think I saw on your website that you listed a few of your musical influences. Would you describe those musical influences for our listeners?
Sure. Well, first of all, let's talk about Leonard Cohen for a moment, because we were talking about language and you were talking about different levels of meaning with the words Little Birdie. I think Leonard Cohen just became a really good template for me of someone who wrote. You could read it as a love song. You could read it as a spiritual, devotional song. You could always see multiple levels in it, but it always had a linear sense to it. You could read it start to finish, and it would make sense. Once I became really aware of his writing, it was something that I tried very hard to achieve. Which, I'm not saying I can write like Leonard Cohen, but I definitely am aware that it needs to make sense. It needs to be accessible, but it should resonate and resonate and resonate. And I don't like songs that are so poetic in effort that they're obscure. I don't want it to be obscure. I want it to be relatable. So I guess Leonard Cohen didn't influence the sound so much, but more how I thought about writing songs.
Well, your songs certainly have poetry. They have that spiritual quality, and musically they're very strong too. So I can see how all those influences come together to make you a musical artist, and they're working, and you're listening and they're working. Let's explore a little bit more about your Jewish themes, the Jewish content that you have in your songs. I know that you have songs about many other subjects, but let's just focus on a couple of them if you don't mind. There's one song that is called The Temple. So why don't you tell us about that song and how it came to be and anything else?
Sure. You know, I grew up in an extremely secular household, so this spirituality thing is something that was latent and wasn't specifically Jewish in my mind. It actually became more Jewish in my mind once I moved to Montreal and left Israel, just by dint of suddenly finding myself an adult in a multicultural society with a name like Orit Shimoni, where, within 2 seconds I got asked, where are you from, and people wanting to talk about it. So it was inescapable that I would have to realize I'm a Jewish person to everyone else here who's not Jewish. That's one of the first things that they see about me, and that got a whole bunch of thoughts flowing. And so that kind of sent me into quite a quest, to the extent that I did a master's degree in theology kind of quest about, well, I am Jewish, and what does that mean? And what does that mean to me if I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, and how do all those things fit in? And I ended up really looking deeply into biblical sources and trying to find out what was it that I felt so attached to, even if I was secular. How did those things balance out? And again, I couldn't help but feel that real extremist religion causes trouble. So I actually ended up going to Israel for a quick visit and walking around the old city in Jerusalem, and I felt a lot of pain. The city is so crazy. There's so much weight behind this place. That sort of set the song in motion. So the temple, it could have been the capital T, but I kind of thought, you know what? It doesn't have to be this temple for this song to work. The point is that really it's misguided to let violence take over and justify it in the name of God, and that's basically the point of that song.
I think most artists are trying to go from the particular to the universal and find that universal. I hesitate to use the word message, but I'll use it. The universal message. Let's talk about another song with Jewish content, the one called "O Abraham." I thought this was really intriguing. It's the story told from the point of view of Abram's wife, Sarah, just as she's pleading to Abram not to take away her beloved son, Isaac. You were talking about biblical language and biblical themes. Was there some personal resonance there, or?
Actually, yes, and this is odd. This came very much at a time where I was listening to Gillian Welch and to a few local bands here in Montreal that integrated a lot of gospel songs, and I just really fell in love with the sound of this kind of music and the sincerity in it and the intensity of it, and just the subject matter, as a friend put it, it's about sin and salvation, and that's what makes it great music. And I thought, oh, that's true. I mean, this is not trivial subject matter. But then at the same time, thought, well, these are all songs about Jesus, and they're really beautiful, but I'm not going to write a song about Jesus because I'm not a Christian. So how am I going to find something that will captivate those same sentiments on some level? I mean, it's obviously a specific story in the case of this song, but I was sort of purposefully looking for something Old Testament to see if I could do something like that. This was a story I really struggled with as a kid. It just didn't ever sit well with me. So
what I love about this is that you've given Sarah a voice. I think in the original story, I don't think Sarah gets to say anything.
No, we don't even know if she's privy to the whole plan.
Yeah, all we know is that shortly after she dies, she passes away probably from sorrow and shock.
We don't even know if she knows at any point if this happens or not, but it was just my problem with the story. I put it in the terms of martyrdom sometimes. Is martyrdom more important than family? And it's an ethical thing that I don't know the answer to at all. Would you give up on what you believe in to protect your family or for the sake of your family or not? Is the thing you believe in more transcendent and more important? And I don't know the answer to that question, but that was one of the things that I thought I always thought there's no way that a woman would let this happen, even if it was God, that the maternal bond would be stronger. But I don't know if that's true. I mean, it's just like it's out there for people to think about. I don't know.
Orit Shimoni, thank you for sharing your thoughts and music with our listeners. Best of luck in your upcoming tour to Europe and all your future endeavors. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, mine too. Thank you so much, Anne.
Oh, Abraham, don't you take the boy from me. I've waited all this lonesome time for him. And I know I live in a time where my voice don't matter. I know the eyes upon his face look like yours.
Follow the Book of Life at twitter.com/bookoflifepod or receive Book of Life updates on Facebook via networked blogs. Our Twitter and Facebook links can be found at bookoflifepodcast.com. The Book of Life is a podcast service of Congregation B'nai Israel of Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries, online at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilachmakers Klezmer String Band at freilachmakers.com. Visit our podcast website at bookoflifepodcast.com or listen to the latest episode by phone at 916-313-3820. We welcome your comments and questions at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and happy reading.
The devil does his testing.